Melissa, thanks for coming back. I know it can be a bit of a challenge coming in, and I think it really is a sign of your strength and your courage to be facing this stuff. Like I said last time, this can be kind of challenging, and so I think it's really great that you came back. So congratulations for coming back.
Thanks.
So today I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, let's kind of lay out where we're headed. I want to talk a little bit about what this treatment is, prolonged exposure, and what you can expect. And that includes what kinds of things are we going to do and why. I say to a lot of my clients that there are no secrets in PE whatsoever. So I want you to know what's coming and why we're going to do what we're going to do. Okay? And after we talk about that for a little while, I want to get a little bit more information from you about some of the experiences that you had downrange, some of the difficult, challenging things that you had. I know we talked a little bit last time, and so I did hear from you a lot of things that had happened. But I think one of the things we need to do today is we need to identify of all those experiences, one in particular, one specifically that we can focus on in treatment. And I know last time when we were together, that was a bit of a challenge. And so one of our goals today, by the time we're done, is to hopefully identify that one specific event that we'll focus on. Okay. So when we're done with that, we'll talk about a breathing technique. I'll teach you a breathing technique that you can use between sessions and away from the office. And so it's intended to help you bring down some of that anxiety too, while we're still anticipating approaching the exposure exercises we're going to do. Okay? And then we'll talk about some exercises you can do between sessions for homework, if you will. And then we'll wrap up. How does that sound?
Pretty good.
Any questions before we get started?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So, as we talked about last time about starting prolonged exposure today, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of housekeeping items first of all. So this is a relatively brief treatment. This lasts anywhere between 8 to 12 sessions. And so we'll meet together 8 to 12 times, and together we'll decide when we've reached kind of our end goal. But that's about how long it usually takes, 8 to 12 sessions. We can meet twice a week, once a week. What works for you?
Once a week is probably a little better.
Okay,
yeah.
And we can do that. That'll be fine. So we'll meet once a week then for 8 to 12. These sessions are about 90 minutes each. I'm not sure if I said that last time, so we can anticipate about 90 minutes for each session. And the main focus of the sessions are on PTSD themselves. And I know, like you said last time, and this is actually really common, there's a lot of other things going on with people who are experiencing PTSD. A lot of challenges in many different areas in their life. And so I'm certainly not to say that those other challenges aren't important. They certainly are. But we're going to focus on PTSD for this treatment so that we can get the biggest bang for our buck, if you will. Okay? And so as you start to see PTSD symptoms come down, as you're starting to feel more functional and in control, then you'll have more resources, if you will, to deal with some of these other issues too. But I want to ask your permission, though, too, as we are going through our sessions, if it feels like we're starting to drift off into other topics, perhaps related, but not talking about PTSD, would it be okay with you if I kind of notice that, identify that, and then refocus us back on PTSD?
Sure.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. That'll help us to stay working on the stuff that is going to be most beneficial to start with. So, okay, great. So, we talked last week too about PTSD and some of the things, some of the symptoms or some of the experiences, some of the reactions that you've had. And I wanted to make sure today one of the things that you hear, if you hear nothing else, is that reactions similar to what you're experiencing are really normal. This is really common for folks who have experienced a trauma, who have gone through a really challenging, really distressing situation. And not everybody goes on then to be diagnosed with PTSD. Not everybody has some of those difficulties for a prolonged period of time, but just about everybody who's gone through a traumatic experience has similar reactions to it in the short term. But some folks get stuck. Some folks really, again, go on to returning to normal functioning, but some get stuck in that normal recovery. And I wonder if you've thought about what things may keep a person stuck.
Because they're more messed up than everybody else.
That can be a common thought too. I hear that a lot from people that I work with. And so, there's this feeling that maybe because of the things that you're going through, maybe some of the experiences you have now that you're kind of broken or messed up. And I appreciate that. I'm glad that you're able to share that with me. I want to maybe kind of twist that a little bit for you or change it a little bit. And again, if you hear nothing else, I hope you hear this, is that from all of the folks that we've worked with, all the people we've worked with clinically, and then a lot of research supports this too, it turns out that the experiences that you're having actually are not broken or messed up at all. This is normal. This is what people experience in a reaction to a challenging, really intense or traumatic experience like you've been through. The difference is that most people haven't had to go through what you've been through. Most people haven't had that kind of experience. And so what you're experiencing is actually pretty normal. Now, one other difference is that your reactions to those experiences have gone on a lot longer than for other folks. And like we said, some people kind of get stuck and prolongs out their experience of these reactions. But there are two major things that we've learned about what keep people stuck. The first one is avoidance. And what I mean by that is, avoiding lots of different things that may be troubling or uncomfortable for a person. It can be as simple as memories or thinking about what happened. It can be talking about what happened with somebody else. It could be even situations in your current life now or things that you encounter today that either remind you of what happened previously or feel dangerous now because of what you went through. I see you nodding. Is it something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And the reason is that avoidance really can, like I said, it keeps people stuck because in some ways it gets in the way of what that natural recovery would otherwise be. And let me just ask you, can you think of a time where perhaps, you were faced with a pretty challenging thing? I know last time you mentioned attending your cousin's funeral. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, my cousin David died about 3 weeks ago. I went to I didn't actually go to the funeral. I went to the wake. And it was open casket. I went up there. I really, really didn't want to go and look at him, but I felt like it was going to be really disrespectful not to. So I went, and I think I was there for like 5 seconds. I kept my eyes closed the whole time, and I immediately walked out afterwards. And all my cousins were there crying and hugging each other, and I just felt like I had to get out of there. So I think I told my mom, like, I had to go get gas or something, and I just left. And by the time I got back, it was over. I think my mom was pretty upset. But then the next day was the funeral, and I told my mom that we were short-staffed and I had to go into work. So I missed it. And I just didn't want to be there anymore. I just, I had to leave. So I think my family was pretty upset at me. And I feel pretty guilty about it. I feel pretty messed up that I couldn't, go and be there for them. And I felt like I disappointed them a lot.
Sure, yeah. You said you had to go. You couldn't be there anymore. Tell me a little bit more about what you were feeling at the time.
I guess I started to feel kind of panicky, but it was more so that they were all crying, and I felt like I couldn't cry. I just didn't feel anything. It was like I was watching a sad movie rather than actually being there, And I just felt really disconnected, and I couldn't believe that, my cousin was like a brother to me, and I didn't feel anything, and he was laying there dead, So
how did you feel after you left?
The weird thing is I actually felt better once I was in the car and out of there, and the thing that calmed me down was it's going to sound so messed up, I was like cataloging his wounds. I was thinking about like how they would have noted the abrasions and removed gravel and,
yeah,
which sounds ridiculous, but it actually calmed me down. So,
in many ways that makes a lot of sense, actually, given the work that you did downrange And certainly we'll talk about that. But given the work that you did downrange, and frankly, you said too, it may sound crazy that you felt better when you left. I hear that really, really commonly. And that's exactly what we're talking about. That's avoidance at work. It works in the short run. That's why people do it. It makes sense. It works in the short run. You feel better. That anxiety or that guilt or the various feelings that you described reduce because you got out of there, right? And it works, but it only works in the short run. In the long run, avoidance really gets in the way of you getting back to your regular functioning afterwards. And it does it in many ways. One is that, let me ask you another question. If you had stayed, how do you think you would have felt?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't feel like I could cry, but I also didn't want to, you know, I mean, I didn't want to start. So
Absolutely. And that's certainly understandable. Let me ask it a different way. Can you think of a time in your life where there was something really challenging or perhaps even a little scary that you needed to do or wanted to do, and as you did it more or as you stayed in that situation, that your feelings about it changed?
yeah, driving, actually.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, when I was learning to drive, my mom is a bit anxious, I guess, by nature, but she never wanted to go out in the car with me, and I think that I was really nervous to go because I felt that she was nervous, and you know, so it was pretty scary at first. And I mean, I never actually hit anything, but I came close. And but the more that I practiced, the more that I, you know, made her go with me and like brought my cousins with me that were older instead, you know, then I got better at it and felt more comfortable with it, I guess.
Great. How do you do now with driving?
I'd like to think I'm pretty good.
Okay. And how do you feel when you drive?
Fine.
Yeah. In many ways, that's really the process that we're talking about here that we're going to do, and we'll get into that in a minute. But and I want to kind of make, you know, really compare those two for the counterpoint. Going to the funeral was really difficult, it sounds like. And in a way that makes total sense, you decided, hey, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want to leave. And when you left, you felt better. And again, it feels better in the short run. Let's compare that, though, to the driving experience. If early on you said, gosh, this feels terrible. I feel really anxious doing this. Mom's watching over my shoulder, or, you know, it's hard to, you know, I had these experiences where maybe I almost hit something. If you had stopped driving at that point and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, what do you think would have happened?
I probably wouldn't be doing it now, I guess.
Probably, yeah. And you'd probably be still pretty anxious about it, too. What's great about that is you've already done this. You've already seen some success with what we're going to do in this treatment. Whereas in the driving situation, you could have avoided, but you didn't. You stuck with it. You approached rather than avoided. And so again, while it makes sense and it's a very normal response to avoid those things that make us anxious, what we're going to do instead is to approach it. We're going to do it in two ways in particular. The first is called in vivo exposure, and that just means exposure in real life. So as we talked about last time, you mentioned a couple of things in our last visit that you tend to be avoiding currently. What we'll do in our next session is we'll actually get a little more detailed. We'll make a list of things that you're avoiding currently. And what we'll do together is to set up exercises where you can approach those things, bring them back into your life. And so I noticed you also had a reaction there. Tell me what you're thinking.
I mean, I guess it's for my own good, but there's definitely a reason why I'm avoiding the things that I am.
Sure. Yeah. And like I said, it actually works for you too, I'm guessing. Yeah. And so you're right. This is not crazy or broken at all. It makes total sense why you'd avoid. But what we're also going to learn too is that by not avoiding, by confronting, that anxiety is not going to last forever, that you actually are competent, and that you will get used to those situations over time, and that anxiety will come down. And like I said, we'll start that in our next session. We'll talk about what those things will be, and we'll approach them in a very structured, very organized way so that you can get the most benefit from doing them. The other kind of exposure that we're going to do is called imaginal exposure. And what we're going to do with that is we're talking about confronting the memory of the event that we're going to identify later that you may be avoiding thinking about or talking about or avoiding reminders of. And so in both of those ways, we're going to really approach those things that you may be avoiding now. So things and places and people currently in your life or situations. And that's at the in vivo exposure. And in imaginal exposure, we're going to confront those memories and that, or the particular and the one that we'll identify here in session. And we'll do that in a very structured, organized way too, so that you can get the most benefit from it as well. We'll start that in session 3. And so again, those are the 2 ways that we're going to really kind of deal with avoidance. We're going to do the opposite of avoidance. We're going to approach. But avoidance is just one of those things that keep people stuck. The other one that we found is that following a traumatic event or a really intense, difficult experience, the way that somebody thinks about that experience, thinks about themselves, or thinks about the world tends to change as well. And can change in some really significant ways. So for example, you mentioned last time sometimes some of the feelings that you have about yourself and about the things that you can do. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I guess I was feeling pretty guilty and disappointed in myself for missing David's funeral, and like I said, I felt like I let down my mom,
Okay.
Feeling pretty messed up about it.
Yeah. And that's not uncommon at all either. Again, following a traumatic experience, people can tend to think of themselves maybe in more negative ways. Maybe I should have, could have, would have done something differently than I did. I'm not capable of handling certain situations. Now, I don't want to just throw out a bunch of them here and just kind of see what sticks. We'll keep an eye out for potential unhelpful thoughts that may come up. But there are also potential thoughts about the world too. Maybe the world feels less safe than it used to, or maybe it feels as though it's difficult trusting others. Again, I'm not saying these are necessarily thoughts that you're having right now, but that those are kind of characteristic of the kind of thoughts that we see with folks that have gone through a difficult experience. And so those thoughts can keep a person stuck in a number of ways. One is that they can also serve as reminders of kind of those negative feelings and such that are related to the trauma. But they also can kind of keep a person stuck by the thoughts themselves, preventing the person from doing those very things that will help them feel better. And so we'll be on the lookout for those. We'll be watching for them. And as we identify those together, we can talk about them and work on those too.
Okay.
Okay, great. So any questions so far?
I don't think so.
What we're going to do? Okay. I'll at the end of our session, I have a handout for you that summarizes what we're talking about. Again, the 2 things that keep people stuck with their reactions, and then the 2 types of exposure that we're going to do. And so what I'd like you to do is to read that over a couple of times between now and our next session. And any questions that you might have as you're reading that through, I'd like you to just jot down on the sheet that I give you and bring those back, and we'll talk about them next time.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, let's kind of do something a little different now. I'd like to kind of shift our focus a bit to talking a little more about some of the stuff that you experienced downrange. I think you told me before that your MOS was not exactly the same thing that you did downrange. Correct?
No, I started off as a med tech in internal medicine, and then my MOS switched to mortuary affairs when I was deployed.
Right. And so you did mention a couple of things about it. It sounded actually more just general about mortuary affairs and the work you did there.
Well, I mean, it's probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. It definitely is, actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was also really proud of the work I did there.
Absolutely.
My unit was really tight. There were only 8 of us. We all were in the same compound. We worked there. We lived there. So we were kind of like a family.
Yeah.
So I miss that, actually. But I mean, the stuff we dealt with was definitely pretty intense. We saw a lot of disfigurement. The really badly burned bodies, really, missing limbs, missing extremities, missing digits. I mean, it's some pretty grim stuff. It's just sort of like a sea of carnage. But I mean, you deal with it because you have to. And I think my NCO said this is the best advice I can give you. Don't look at the personal effects too much. Don't get too attached because you have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you can't do it.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you got to learn how to cope with this, and keeping your distance is one of those ways. Are there other ways that you managed?
I mean, it's going to sound a little messed up, but we would kind of make jokes about it, some pretty bad stuff, actually. But, I mean, it's just the way we dealt with it,
Yeah.
It feels, I guess I feel kind of guilty about that, too.
Okay. And that's something that we can talk about, too, as we go along. So of all those, it seems like it's kind of a daily, I don't know if you would characterize it daily, but it sounds like a kind of a daily exposure to some pretty disturbing things.
Yeah, I mean, we're on call 24/7, so, I'm dealing with multiple bodies on some days. I mean, it was pretty rough.
Yeah. Now, I know this might be a little difficult and a little challenging. Of all those experiences throughout your deployment in mortuary affairs, is there one or two that really stand out to you that would, one that you could focus on in particular, or kind of define particularly for us to focus on in treatment?
I mean, I don't know. It was all pretty bad. I don't know if I could identify like the worst thing,
Yeah, and I believe you that. I mean, it seems like it would all be really bad stuff. And the reason that I'm asking for one in particular is not to suggest that one is more important than others at all. What we want to try to do is to focus on the one event that causes you the most difficulty now, actually, so that we can get really specific and really detailed when we get into the imaginal exposure. It'll be the most useful for you and our work together if we can get really specific about one particular event. And so I know while it can be difficult to really pick one out of all of those difficult things you did or experienced, is there one maybe that that challenges you more when you mentioned nightmares last time, one that you have more nightmares about, or one that you think about more when you're noticing kind of those thoughts creeping in? Or
I guess there's probably one thing that maybe stands out more than other things. There was one night, I think it was 0300. I mean, I guess it was really early in the morning, actually, but we had already processed a few bodies that day, and we got a call that a PFC was coming in from Roll 3. That's the hospital unit. Just sort of showed up on my table, I guess, and I ended up being the one who pulled back the sheet, and I guess it sticks out in my head because he looked normal, like perfect, like completely intact, so
somewhat of a departure from what you normally saw?
Definitely. I mean, this is going to sound weird, but sometimes when bodies come to us and they're really messed up, I mean, it doesn't really seem real, Okay. But this particular one looked like a person, so I guess it just shook me up a little bit.
Okay. Shook you up that instead of this being something that was easily detached from or easily not.
Yeah, I mean, he could have been sleeping, like it.
Okay, and so this is one that kind of stands out more
Yeah.
for you now. Okay, so that's one possibility there. Yeah. Any others that really stand out to you?
No, I think when I've been having nightmares, that's the one that I think about the most. Yeah.
And just to make sure that we're kind of covering all our bases too, and not leaving something out, how about any other experiences, either while downrange or back in garrison, that were really challenging for you, where you felt like your life was in danger, for perhaps, where you were facing the possibility of significant injury, or maybe somebody close to you or witnessing something like that?
No, I mean, that didn't really happen for me.
Okay. So it sounds like then that this particular event, not to say that this is the most important one, but of all the events, experiences that you went through in mortuary affairs, this one kind of stands out more than the others. This one's the one that causes you more difficulty now. Okay. So I would suggest that would be the one that we'll work on when we start working on imaginal exposure. And really, I'll have you keep that in mind too sometimes when I'm asking you some questions about things that you're experiencing currently too. Okay? Okay. Like I said, we'll start that in session 3. It might be helpful for us as we're approaching that to think about where does this particular experience begin and end? Because, like you said, they kind of run together, or you had already seen 2 other bodies that evening. And so, like, a beginning point may be about when does this depart from the normal awful, that you, like you said, the awfulness of being there.
Probably when I pulled back the sheet.
Okay. When you're able to see that this wasn't just like any other that came across.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll probably start that, when we start doing the imaginal exposure, what if we start that just before that, when the body arrives? And so we can start a slow ramp right into that story. Okay. And at what point then would that event return to that normal baseline, what it was?
I mean, I guess I had a different kind of reaction to it. So probably, maybe right after we put the ice on him, I went outside to have a cigarette, probably around then.
Okay. Okay, so I'm writing just some notes to myself here. So we'll begin, the beginning of that will be when the body first arrives on your table. And then we'll end it when you're out having a cigarette after that's over. Okay. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I know that's not the most pleasant thing to talk about. We will talk about it more. And like I said, we'll really get into it in session 3, talking more about that specific event. But like I said, I understand that can be difficult at times. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. That can be tough. So good job.
Thanks.
Let's change gears here. And we're going to move away from talking about that event. And I'm going to teach you the breathing technique that I mentioned at the beginning.